What happens at the point of death?
And then the next thing I remember is being in the hospital room above the bed.
Do you just disappear?
And I noticed this sort of mass, I guess, and I started to identify it as my body.
Some people say there is a light.
I just started raising up.
Others describe a love more profound than any other.
And I was viewing everything through my solar plexus.
Most near-death experiencers say the other side was more real than life on Earth.
And I have to say, upon reflection, I never felt more alive than when I was dead.
Consciousness Continues seeks answers to the question, what happens when we die?
And then in 1975, Raymond Moody published his first book on this subject, Life After Life. As our media often does with hot topics, they took some of his findings and his thoughts and sensationalized it. So today we associate the near-death experience with tunnels, when in fact most people don't have tunnels.
Can't speak for anyone else, but I think my experience is pretty common, and that is that you just find yourself suddenly somewhere else. You're here in one place, and then a moment later you're somewhere else. For me, it was a bit confusing. I didn't know where I was or what had happened to me. I knew it was me. I just knew I wasn't in my body. And I knew I was somewhere else, and I knew I was okay.
I left my body very violently. I thought that I had somehow collapsed and hit my chin on the bar because it seemed that I flew up in the air, straight up in the air.
I didn't care about the physical body, and so it was like a pop for me, just popping out of the body, and off we went towards light.
I didn't have a feeling of leaving my body. I didn't know I was dead. I really didn't for a long time. I just knew all of a sudden I was dropped into this very strange situation and had to just take off running from there. I didn't really have time to think about it.
The majority of people, even for children and adults, they're going to describe the out-of-body experience. Most people have an out-of-body experience.
I remember looking down, and then I remember thinking, I'm actually looking down at the doctors working on me, and at that moment, I realized that I was out of my body, and no longer was I in any pain, and actually saw the devastational look on everybody's face, but I was feeling really good. Kevin, my daughter's father, looked like he was gonna pass out. They were so frantic trying to work on me that no one had asked him to leave. And so when I popped out of my body, I remember looking at him and then looking at the clock. That's how I remember that it was 5:30 when I died. The pulmonary specialist was taking different tubes and putting them down my throat because I guess he couldn't find a good fit. So I remember one being flown back over his shoulder, and I saw this from above. Another doctor was yelling at him that he needed to hurry because the ship was sinking. And so I remember thinking, that's interesting, I'm not a ship, I'm a person. I just looked like I was sleeping. When I was out of my body, I had so much knowledge that I actually knew that there was a gentleman in a room next to me who was also dying. His soul left his body and went where we were going. I knew what he looked like on this earth, and then I also knew what he looked like in soul form. But the interesting thing is, I was aware that he was passing on and that he was going to stay passed on. After focusing on the gentleman in the next room, I then just started raising up. I went through the hospital. I did not see a light. I did not go through a tunnel. I actually went through the top of the hospital and I could see Earth. I could see everything. I could see the lights. I could see buildings. I could see houses. And it was almost like I took my attention somewhere else, and I was, to the best way that I could describe it, I was home. So I was in front of what looked to be a playground.
With some people, it's a really quick leaving the body, going up to the ceiling, then viewing the body from the ceiling and looking back down. Other people leave the room.
I remember not being able to breathe, and then the next thing I remember is being in the hospital room above the bed, and how light I felt and how free I felt, and I was no longer engaged in that struggle. Like I was floating on the ceiling, and I was able to look down, and I was no longer associated with my body, and really looking at this body on the bed and watching the people in the room. And my parents were in the room, there was a nurse in the room, there was a doctor in the room, and they were arguing. And it's interesting, the arguing that was going on, my thoughts were, they're acting like I'm not there, that I can't hear what they're saying, that they don't think that it's important for me to hear. And the next thing I remember was being in a whole different place.
I found myself outside my body, which was still in the ocean, being tumbled and tossed in the waves. And I was just there observing it. The three original light beings that greeted me were with me. We were watching as my body got tangled with the bow line from the wreckage of the Zodiac. The bow line actually wrapped itself around this arm, and the end of the bow line, we call it the bitter end, was tapping my lifeless chest. And I was mystified by this because I knew I had to go back into this body, and I was trying to imagine, how is the enormity of me, this light being, going to fit in there? And so I was watching this, just observing this, when all of a sudden another set of waves hit the wreckage, and there must have been a little bit of air left in one of the pontoons of the Zodiac. And so it popped the Zodiac up, and when it did, it cinched that rope around my arm and pulled me up and pulled my body up to the surface, where it got really tangled up in all the lines. And then the waves started pounding my body up against this wreckage, and when it did, it pushed some of that salt water out of my lungs. And my soul family gave me a push, and I found myself back in my body.
And by the way, it's very detailed with most people. Detailed to the point that we are able afterward to seek out verification, and most of these cases have third-party verification of what they saw, what they witnessed, what they felt and heard out of body.
So the first thing I remember is a woman's voice to my left saying, "I'm not getting a pulse, I'm not getting a pulse." And with the same sense of reality with which I'm now speaking, I turned to her and said, "Of course you're getting a pulse, otherwise I wouldn't be talking." I don't know, I was in the awkward position actually of ultimately comforting her because she was so stressed out. I was fine. In fact, by golly, I felt alive. And I have to say, upon reflection, I never felt more alive than when I was dead. I was like, everything was unplugged. All channels were open. All systems I had shrouded my true self in were gone. It was wonderful. Then I got kind of ticked off. Not angry, that was not an emotion that was available to me, but frustrated or irritated. She kept ignoring me. So I don't know if I got into like a near-death snit or what, but I just thought, I'm out of here, and I let go. Key decision was letting go, and I do have a memory of that. Well, I'm just out of here. I was back. Here I'd had the most spiritual experience I believe is possible in this life. And all I could think of was a joke. I had flunked my driver's test because I couldn't parallel park. That had happened before getting my auto license. And I missed the curb by about 4 feet, something that I do to this day. I couldn't parallel park my own body because I found myself on my back about 4 feet from my physical body. And the first thing I thought of was, I can't even park myself. So now what? And I looked at myself, hadn't seen myself in profile, I don't think ever. I didn't remember being that big. I used to be a little thing, and well, of course I was inflated. I wasn't alarmed, I just sort of like, what the heck? Because the me that was me was not in that body lying on the sidewalk. My sense of who I am, of Kim, I had identity. I had awareness, knowledge, memory, all of that was 4 feet from the brain. And I could see, and again, eyeballs were in the body. I could hear, eardrums, and everything that was needed to have the perceptions that I was having were physical and 4 feet away, and yet it was all operational. In fact, it was working very well. And then before I had a thought about, I wonder what next, I watched a man come over to the body and my body, bend over, and as soon as his mouth touched mine, and this was, of course, the Good Samaritan, I went into my body, but through his to get there. And as I went through his body, I could perceive everything about the guy, certainly emotionally. His own anxiety, part of him, ego-wise, was going, this isn't going well. But mainly what I felt was compassion. Well, compassion is another form of love. I'd just been with the greatest love of all. So this was like my beacon. Of course I was going to be drawn to it. And then I think the physical touch helped too. So I settled into my body, and then it became hell.
I had a fairly intense woo-woo event, I guess, before I had an out-of-body experience. When I looked up, everything was completely different. It had changed entirely. I no longer felt that pain. Everything looked different. It felt different. I was not focused on my physical body whatsoever. It just didn't even matter to me. In the second part of my experience, I had stood up and I started walking. It was like I had stood up too fast and my vision had sort of started to black out. And I turned around. I thought it just kind of hit me as soon as I stood up, and I thought, what just happened? And I turned around, and it was immediately this most beautiful scene, these vibrant colors, this energy, everything. It was like, yes, this is true. This happened. So I turned around again. I took 3 steps and fell straight on my face. I didn't know that I fell straight on my face. Everything went black to me. I aspirated. That means I vomited but my throat was swollen shut to a point that the vomit went back down into my lungs. I could not breathe. It wasn't a hard threshold for me. It was suddenly being enveloped by the black or nothingness somehow. Basically, I thought the sun just went down. I just thought I was continuing to walk all night long. And eventually I began to see a light up to my left, which I just assumed was the lights from the party. I was focused on getting to the path, which was not going toward the light, which I think is kind of funny looking back on it. While I'm walking, I start to hear a conversation. I start to hear an argument that's happening. And then I start to notice that the light that's shining kind of from my left and above me seems to be sort of illuminating a scene to my right and below me. And then I kind of thought to myself, well, I must have been dreaming. When I had gone to sleep the night before, for this first time in California, we were staying at a house and we were staying on the top floor. I thought I was just at the balcony, like I'd just woken up and walked out to the balcony and was looking over into the living room. I just thought I was above the conversation. I thought I was above these people talking. And then I started to realize they were talking about me. And I noticed this sort of mass. I started to identify it as my body. This is me. My girlfriend was arguing with her stepmother. She was a nurse. She taught CPR and rescue breathing, and she did not want to give me rescue breathing because my face was covered with sand and vomit, and she thought that was kind of gross. And I mean, I can understand, you know. So my girlfriend was arguing with her, please help them. And I remember telling them, I remember going to them and saying, I'm okay, I'm fine. But they kept arguing, and I said it again. I'm okay. You please don't inconvenience yourself. I don't want anyone to feel grossed out because of me. But they just weren't listening. And then I began to realize they could not hear me. Then I saw her stepmother finally go down over top of me, give the first sort of breath of life back to me. And at that moment, I felt myself like a car wreck or something, just slamming back into my body. I saw all these people around me asking me questions. What day is it? Who's the president? What's your name? What year is it? Things like that. I knew what they were asking me. I didn't care. I couldn't actually hear their voices. I knew what they were asking. I could see their mouths moving, but I could not actually hear their voices. The only thing I could hear were the waves on the beach continuing to come in. And as I was watching these people and just amazed by what had just happened to me and just sort of, I guess, in shock, literally, what really was taking my attention was, I saw these people helping me and trying so hard to get through to me. But I was blown away. I was more focused on what appeared to be the people behind them who were helping them help me. And the only way I can describe those people, I don't like to use religious terms as much, but the only way I can really describe it to get the point across would be to say that they were angels. They didn't look like babies with wings. They looked like light. They looked like people, but they looked like light. It's very, very hard to describe, but I knew that they were there helping the people that were helping me.
If they're being rushed to the hospital in an emergency vehicle, they'll leave the vehicle and ride on top of the vehicle for the trip to the hospital, wondering, well, what am I doing here on top of this vehicle, enjoying the scenery?
And I'm laying there, and I had a friend there that I went to high school with who was a nurse, and she looked at me and she said, you need to lay down. And I said, okay. And that's when I left my body. That's really when something inside of me pulled me inside of myself, and I was viewing everything through my solar plexus. But in my intelligence, I kept saying, that's not possible. You can't be viewing something inside yourself in your solar plexus. Where's my eyes? Nothing was making sense, but everything was making sense. And this being inside of me was reassuring me the entire time, be still, be quiet. And I kept thinking, well, am I screaming and yelling outside of myself? What's going on? And it kept saying, be still, be quiet. Well, then when they opened up the door, I saw my husband. Then they pushed him out real fast. And then I looked up at the same time as the door was closing. There's my principal, who had just found out that I was in the emergency room, and something told her intuitively to go to the emergency room. Well, why? Because Sister Marcia is the one who rode in the ambulance with me. So she was the one who saw the whole event. And I remember I could hear things, I could see things, I could even feel myself in the corner because I was already out of my body because of the pain. But yet I could still be in my body at the same time. So I was seeing two different stories, but yet it's all going on at the same time. So I was really confused, but yet not confused. When you have a near-death experience, there is two dualities to it. And I'd had out-of-body experiences, obviously, a lot in my life. I just didn't know what they were. So when I got into this, I didn't realize that I had been there from 3 o'clock to 8 o'clock that night. They finally stabilized me and I got into the emergency vehicle. And I heard the gentleman as he was pushing me in, he said, "She's not gonna make it." And I was very angry that he would even say that. Well, he never said a word. I read his mind because I was out of my body. I couldn't see anything. That's what made me mad too, is I asked Marcia, I said, "Did they turn off the lights? Why would they turn off the lights?" She said, "They were never turned off. The lights were never turned off." Well, when I got out of my body, that's when the lights went off. I was literally following the ambulance, and I was in the ambulance, but yet I was outside the ambulance. And that's when I could look forward to the road, but yet be in the van at the same time.
For some reason, in the articles we read today, that this person reported an out-of-body experience, isn't this unique, isn't this kind of different, but we have no way of proving it. And I, as a researcher, is saying, haven't you read the data? Haven't you read the papers? Most of it have third-party verification. Where are you?